Thank you so much. So this one is going to be a little different than, so those of you who came to my previous talks know that I sort of stick to a very scientific, here's the data and here's the design. This one's going to be a little different, but I think it's necessary because one of the things that I've done, for those of you who have not met me yet, my name is Lissa Ramsapal. I work in Washington, D.C. I work with folks who are experiencing homelessness for about 22 years now. I didn't do that on purpose, it just sort of happened. I thought I was going to go work with folks dealing with severe mental illness, and one thing led to another, and there's a lot of comorbidity with vulnerable populations, as you can imagine. What I find that when working with homelessness is that you touch everything else. You touch development, you touch families, you touch severe mental illness, you touch mild mental illness, you touch chronic health conditions. There's so many different things, substance use. So one of the things that I've started becoming interested in is what is the impact on parent-child relationships. I am very big on attachment theory. It just seems like when I learned all the others, and when I got to that, it just suddenly made sense. And a lot, as we develop some of the more scientific neurological basis for behavior and attachment studies, it explains a lot in terms of understanding more and more. This is not a theory that is just about early childhood. This is not about an explanation that matters to us just for the first 3 years or 5 years. This really has the capacity to go on and impact adulthood, and that's part of why I'm working with homelessness. This has led me to this particular study. So those of you who saw my last presentation, this actually came out of that. As I was doing my research for my dissertation thesis, I started noticing this interesting parallel and lots of things that centered around parent-child disruption and bonding. And potentially, I guess it could be a bit of a stretch, so I'd like to study it more, is some parallel between the early idea of attachment of monotropy, where a young infant is hardwired to create a single primary attachment bond in order to stay alive and to get needs met. I was noticing an interesting and a little bit surprising parallel in late adolescence, particularly in kids who have been homeless, and I'm curious about the impact, so that led to this study. So the idea of this was to explore the experiences of families that are separated due to homelessness or efforts to prevent homelessness, to determine the impact of family separation due to homelessness, and the contributing factors. So not just the homelessness. Sometimes I found that the things that are leading the family to be on the edge of housing instability might be disrupting the relationship as well a bit. And then also to identify what are the best ways to support families. Can we prevent homelessness outright whenever possible? But also strengthening the interpersonal competency in children, and also I should say adolescents and young adults, because as I said, I'm seeing the beginnings of a sign that there's more here that we need to look at. So the problem, I'm not going to go into graphic detail. Most of us have heard a lot about the problems that occur when parents and children don't bond. You can imagine the problems that occur when you have nowhere safe to live. The impact on, the one thing I will point out though is that the impact on childhood bonding, one of the things I wondered about is how does that impact help-seeking behaviors? Things like proximity seeking, again, we think of in young children. But again, if you're 17, you need to be able to engage in a certain amount of proximity seeking to get help, especially if you're in a vulnerable state. And relationships, we know, are a resilience factor against a lot of things. Affiliation, having somebody that you can turn to. Without that, and if that can be something that is disrupted as a result of not really being able to bond earlier in life, I think that it's something that bears looking at, not just for the impact on kids, but the long-term impact on adults and on our society, honestly. So this was a very simple study. This was qualitative, cross-sectional, propositive sampling. As you can imagine, that term warrants a snowball sampling because it's a little hard to get people to talk about what it's like to be separated from their children. These are all folks in the DC area who affiliated with a homeless services organization. And I will point out that this was a semi-structured interview, But I really didn't have to say very much. Once people started opening up, they just talked. For example, I had 10 questions. Each question had 3 prompts in case people stopped talking. I never got through more than 3 questions with anybody. They just started talking. So I do think it's an area people are anxious to think about. So here was my sample. It was 20 adults. The youngest was 18. The oldest was 50. 10 men, 10 women. Didn't plan that, it just happened. 75% were parents, 25% were non-parents, which I thought was interesting. I anticipated all parents in this study, but others were interesting and had some good things to say. 100% had been displaced in childhood, either as a result of family homelessness or to avoid it, which I'll get to in a moment. 10% of the sample are custodial parents, meaning 2 out of 20 had custody of their children as the primary caretaker. 15% have children that were placed in foster care, so again, 3 out of 20. And 50% have children normally placed with, informally placed with relatives. So these are folks who may have asked their parents or another relative or a sibling to take care of their child. And a quarter of the parent population had children that were with their friends, so not a formal relative. The results were interesting. 85% of the sample reported asking others to take care of their kids. 50% said that they feel that their children became more distant. I was a little curious about that because 75% described conflicts upon reunification that suggests this parent-child distance, but only 50% of that group acknowledged any kind of sense of difference with the child. I will get to the excerpts in just a moment. The one thing I want to point out is that the non-parents report feelings of futility around redeveloping the relationship upon reunification. And to give you an idea, one of the samples was, the subject was 46 years old. And she could remember all 3 times she'd been separated from her parents in childhood. And it was never an angry thing. It was just, no, you're going to go stay with grandma for the summer, or you're going to go stay with, Aunt Susan for, 3 weeks. And she just said it just felt like every time she came back, she felt less like that was home, and less like this was family, and less like people understood her. And when I asked her why, she said, well, you know how it is. You go away from anyone for any period of time, you come back and you've changed, or they've changed. You can't tell which. You just know it feels different. Think about, as an adult, how short of a period of time it takes for us to feel that way. Think about it in a child's development. So that was an interesting finding that I did not anticipate. So actually, I'm going to pause there for a moment. I wanted to get us away from looking at, whoops, hold on, I can do that. Or I may have to, there we go. I wanted to get us away from sort of being in the cognitive part of our brain where we're looking at lots of words on a page, and just for a moment, listen. So if you'll bear with me. If you feel like it, close your eyes. I just think it's an interesting moment to just hear people for a change. So this was one subject. It's hard, to decide that you can't take care of your child. You don't want them to know, but I can't let them see me suffer either. I just thought that her teacher was always nice to us, and maybe if I got her to take her in, that she could stay there while I figure out what to do. I know how those shelters are and stuff. I don't want her seeing that, what goes on there, I don't want kids knowing that she lived there. She's my daughter. Ain't nobody gonna take my child from me. This is just a temporary thing. So that was one parent. Another subject, this was a subject who did not have children. Yeah, my mom's was always working lots of jobs and whatnot. Her boyfriend was around, but men don't like men, having another man in the house. So when I was 11, he started knocking me around, a little bit. Nothing bad. I didn't tell my mom's nothing because she would just send me to stay with my grandma or aunt. They was nice enough, but always talking like I couldn't hear. Always talking about how my mom should just give me to someone, someone who could take care of me and my sister and stuff. When I was 15, I was supposed to go back to my other auntie's house, but she entered the door and she was confused. She said I was supposed to be at my Aunt Carol's house. I just said, yes, ma'am, and turned and walked away. I never talked to anyone in my so-called family again. They couldn't be bothered, and neither can I. You know, I don't got no kids of my own. Can't do that. Can't do nobody like they did me. Family screws you up, yo. Forgive the American colloquialism. So this is the last one, and there are more of these if people are interested later. I can share some of it. Well, I didn't want to, but the shelter said I wasn't homeless yet. I got this notice that we had to go, but didn't have, what do they call it, a writ of eviction. So like the eviction date, that they were gonna come and, like I'm gonna wait for somebody to come to my house and bang on my door in the middle of the night and kick me and my baby out? She was 8 at the time. She doesn't need to know the world's like that. I just started asking her school friends' moms if they let her spend the night. You know, like kids do, just, you know, spend the night with your friend, right? I figured that way she wouldn't have to know he was homeless. But she kept asking to come back with me. Finally, I had to tell her that the apartment was gone. And I couldn't get her that day because I didn't have any place to stay. She told me we could stay together in a broom closet like in that movie, you know, Pursuit of Happiness, Will Smith and all that. I started to cry, but told her to stay where she is and have fun with her friend. She asked every day for a while. Then she stopped asking. About 2 months later, I found a little room in a basement and got her back. After that, she didn't even want to be with me no more. Like she didn't even see me as her mom. Thank you. So just some really quick discussion. You know, these are some of the things that I want to look at to explore this topic further. Like I said, this came out of another study that was an unexpected twist for me. I think it ends up being important. One of the things I've learned in homelessness, so my area of interest, first and foremost, has always been children and young adults. Partly because I've always been interested in prevention. There are so many things, you know, we can't give them a perfect set of genes, we can't give them a perfect environment and everything that we want to give them, but what we give to the kids today is all of our tomorrow. And if there's a way to explore these things as a community and look at systems of care, it shouldn't matter whether someone's a parent or not. It should matter that we all hope to be around and we hope to leave the world better than we came into it, right? So one of the things I've learned with homelessness is that it touches every population. It touches children. It's one of those things that it doesn't care if you came from a lot of money, if you have a good education. I've had clients over the years who were doctors, who were nurses, who had master's degrees, who had, at one point, owned their own home, 2 cars in the garage, teenager with a car. There's a certain amount of economic instability that we have to face in the world, and it impacts our kids. One of the things that we need to look at, I think, is how does that impact our parental bonds with our children, and how can we all pull together to, we know the negative outcomes when kids are separated from parents. I think in one of the talks the other day, it was talking about, it's sad, but statistically we know even a crappy family is better than no family. It's sad, but it's true. So in knowing that, how do we fix that? How do we, as a society, and particularly those of us in the West, where we're so individualistic, how do we find solutions that engage everybody in a child's life? So that's sort of where we are. I will hold off questions until the coffee break, but I will be up. Thank you all for your time and attention.